There's a moment in every social interaction when the power shifts. You feel it before you see it. The room recalibrates. Conversations pause. Eyes adjust. And suddenly, without anyone announcing it, without any formal declaration, someone else is in control. Not through volume, not through aggression, not through desperate attempts to prove their worth. They simply exist differently. They move through social spaces like they own the gravity itself. Niccolò Machiavelli understood this better than anyone who ever lived. But here's what most people miss about his teachings. He wasn't writing a manual for tyrants. He was documenting the invisible laws that govern every human interaction. The subtle mechanics of influence that operate in boardrooms, dinner parties, dating, friendships, and every single moment where two or more people occupy the same space. Today, I'm going to reveal the 3 silent laws Machiavelli would have used to dominate modern social dynamics. Not with force, not with manipulation, but with something far more powerful. Presence that commands without demanding. Influence that flows without forcing. Control that operates so smoothly, others willingly hand it over. These aren't just theories. These are psychological principles that reshape how people respond to you the moment you walk into any room. And by the end of this series, you'll understand why some people naturally attract respect, loyalty, and influence, while others spend their entire lives begging for scraps of attention. But first, let me tell you why this matters more now than ever before. We live in the age of performance. Everyone's trying to be seen, heard, validated. Social media has turned existence into a desperate competition for likes, follows, and digital approval. People broadcast their every thought, emotion, and achievement, hoping someone will notice them. They explain themselves constantly. They defend their choices publicly. They seek permission through posts and stories. And in this chaos of noise, of people screaming for attention, the person who understands Machiavelli's silent laws doesn't compete. They don't perform. They don't explain. They simply appear. And when they do, the entire dynamic shifts, because while everyone else is playing for attention, they're playing for something infinitely more valuable. Authority. Here's what I discovered studying human behavior for over a decade. The people who hold real power in any social setting aren't the loudest ones. They're not the ones with the most credentials hanging on their walls. They're not even necessarily the most talented. They're the ones who understand the invisible currents that move beneath every conversation, every glance, every pause in dialogue. Machiavelli called this the art of appearing. Not being, but appearing. Because perception shapes reality faster than truth ever could, and the person who masters perception masters everything else that follows. So what are these 3 silent laws? How do they work? And more importantly, how do you implement them starting today to transform how people respond to you? The first law is the law of controlled scarcity. The second is the law of strategic ambiguity. The third is the law of emotional immunity. Each one builds on the others. Each one operates beneath the surface of normal social awareness. And when combined, they create something that most people will never understand, but everyone will feel. Let's begin with the law of controlled scarcity. This isn't about playing hard to get. This isn't about being antisocial or deliberately unavailable. This is about understanding something most people never realize. Your presence has value only when your absence is felt. Think about the people in your life who command the most respect, not the ones who demand it, but the ones who naturally receive it. I guarantee you, they're not always available. They don't respond to every message immediately. They don't show up to every event. They don't fill every silence with words. When they speak, people listen not because they're loud, but because they choose their moments. This is what Machiavelli meant when he wrote about the prince who appears rarely but powerfully. Scarcity creates value, but here's the key. It must be controlled. Random absence is just flakiness. Strategic absence is power. The average person makes themselves too available. They say yes to everything. They respond instantly. They show up everywhere. They're always ready to engage, to help, to participate. And in doing so, they dilute their own influence. They become background noise, expected, taken for granted. But the person who understands controlled scarcity operates differently. They choose where they appear. They select which conversations deserve their input. They decide which invitations merit their presence, not out of arrogance, but out of strategic awareness. When you're always available, people stop valuing your availability. When you're selectively available, every appearance becomes an event. People start wondering where you are when you're not there. They begin to adjust their plans around your presence. They save their best stories for when you show up. This creates what psychologists call intermittent reinforcement, the most powerful form of behavioral conditioning. People become more invested in something they can't predict or control than something that's always guaranteed. But here's where most people misunderstand this principle. They think it means being cold or distant. It doesn't. When you are present, you're fully present. When you engage completely. The scarcity isn't in your warmth or attention when you choose to give it. The scarcity is in when and where you choose to give it. This transforms your social value from common to premium, from expected to anticipated, from taken for granted to genuinely appreciated. The second component of controlled scarcity is conversational restraint. Most people talk too much. They fill every pause. They explain their thoughts in unnecessary detail. They repeat themselves to ensure they're understood. They seek validation through verbal volume. Machiavelli would have watched this behavior with fascination and horror, because every extra word diminishes the power of the essential ones. Every unnecessary explanation weakens your position. Every attempt to fill silence with noise broadcasts insecurity. The person who masters controlled scarcity speaks less, but says more. They let silence exist without rushing to fill it. They make statements rather than seeking approval through questions. They offer perspectives without needing to justify them. This doesn't mean being quiet for the sake of being mysterious. It means understanding that your words carry more weight when they're fewer in number, that your opinions matter more when you don't share all of them, that your thoughts become more valuable when people have to earn access to them. Watch how this plays out in your daily interactions. The person who dominates every conversation often leaves the least lasting impression. But the person who speaks thoughtfully, selectively, and with precision, their words echo long after they've left the room. People start quoting them, referencing their insights, wondering what they really think about topics they haven't addressed. The controlled scarcity of their input makes every word feel significant. This brings us to the third element of this first law: emotional availability. Most people make their emotions immediately accessible. They react visibly to everything. They show excitement, frustration, joy, anger, all in real time. They wear their internal state on their face for everyone to read and respond to. But emotions that are always visible lose their impact. When people can predict your emotional responses, they can manipulate them. When your feelings are constantly on display, they become part of the background, rather than meaningful signals. The person who understands controlled scarcity maintains emotional restraint, not emotional deadness, but emotional selectivity. They choose when to reveal what they're feeling. They control the timing and intensity of their emotional expression. This creates intrigue. People become curious about what you're really thinking. They start studying your expressions for clues. They value the moments when you do show genuine emotion, because those moments feel earned rather than automatic. But here's the critical distinction. This isn't about suppressing your humanity. It's about curating your emotional display. Being genuine when you choose to be vulnerable. Being present when you decide to engage. Being warm when you select to connect. The power lies in the selection itself. In the fact that your emotions, your words, your presence, these things are given rather than assumed, offered rather than taken for granted. This is how controlled scarcity transforms your social position. You move from being someone who's always there to someone whose presence is noticed, from someone who always responds to someone whose response is valued, from someone who's easily read to someone who maintains an element of mystery. And mystery, as Machiavelli knew, is the foundation of influence. Because people don't obsess over what they completely understand. They obsess over what feels just beyond their reach. Now we move to the second silent law, the law of strategic ambiguity. This is where most people completely misunderstand the nature of power. They think clarity equals strength. They believe being direct means being dominant. They assume that explaining their position thoroughly will earn them respect. Machiavelli would have laughed at this naive thinking. Because the moment you become completely predictable, you become completely controllable. The moment everyone knows exactly where you stand on everything, they know exactly how to move you. Strategic ambiguity isn't about being deceptive. It's about maintaining interpretive space. It's about allowing others to project their own meanings onto your actions while you remain the author of your own narrative. Think about the most influential people you've encountered. Not the ones who told you everything they were thinking, but the ones who left you wondering. The ones whose motivations you couldn't quite pin down. The ones who seemed to operate from a playbook you couldn't access. This uncertainty creates a psychological phenomenon called the ambiguity effect. When people can't categorize you completely, their minds become fixated on solving the puzzle you represent. They start paying closer attention to your words, your expressions, your choices. They begin to assign significance to details they would ignore in others. But here's the sophisticated part. Strategic ambiguity works on multiple levels simultaneously. It operates in what you say, how you say it, and most importantly, in what you choose not to say at all. Conversational ambiguity begins with your responses to direct questions. Most people answer exactly what's asked in the exact way it's asked. They provide complete information, full context, and emotional transparency. They want to be helpful, clear, understood. The person who masters strategic ambiguity responds differently. When asked about their weekend plans instead of a detailed itinerary, they might say, "Something interesting is developing." When questioned about their opinion on a controversial topic, rather than taking a clear side, they might offer, "There are layers most people don't consider." These responses aren't evasive. They're expansive. They open interpretive space rather than closing it. They invite curiosity rather than satisfying it completely. This creates what psychologists call the Zeigarnik effect. The human mind becomes obsessed with incomplete information. People remember unfinished stories more vividly than completed ones. They think about partial answers longer than comprehensive explanations. When you master conversational ambiguity, you become memorable not for what you revealed, but for what you kept in reserve. People leave interactions with you feeling like they learned something significant, even though they can't quite articulate what it was. The second layer is positional ambiguity. This involves your stance on hierarchies, relationships, and social dynamics. Most people make their position immediately clear. They signal whether they're seeking approval, offering submission, or demanding dominance. They broadcast their needs, insecurities, and intentions through their behavior. But strategic ambiguity maintains uncertainty about your position in any dynamic. Are you evaluating or being evaluated? Are you interested or merely polite? Are you impressed or simply observing? This uncertainty forces others to work harder to understand where they stand with you. When people can't determine your position, they default to assuming you hold a higher one. It's a psychological protection mechanism. They treat you with more consideration because they're not sure what the consequences of disrespect might be. This doesn't require any explicit claims of authority. It simply requires refusing to signal submission, not seeking approval through your questions, not qualifying your statements with uncertainty, not explaining your right to hold opinions or occupy space. The third dimension is intentional ambiguity. This is perhaps the most powerful because it operates at the level of motivation. Why are you here? What do you want? What are you building toward? Most people make their intentions transparent because they've been taught that honesty builds trust. But Machiavelli understood something deeper. Transparent intentions can be easily thwarted. When people know exactly what you want, they know exactly how to deny it to you. When they understand your complete motivation, they can manipulate your decisions by controlling the variables you care about. Strategic ambiguity around intentions creates a different dynamic entirely. People begin to wonder if you're testing them, if you're evaluating opportunities they can't see, if you're operating from information or perspectives they don't possess. This uncertainty makes them more careful around you, more generous in their offerings, more respectful in their approach, because they're not sure what you might be capable of, what connections you might have, or what you might do if they underestimate you. But here's the critical balance. Strategic ambiguity must feel natural, not forced. It should emerge from genuine depth rather than calculated mystery. The goal isn't to confuse people for the sake of confusion. It's to maintain space for your own development and decision-making. When someone asks about your career plans, instead of outlining every step, you might say, "I'm exploring some interesting possibilities." This isn't dishonest, it's accurate and open-ended. It leaves room for opportunities you haven't discovered yet, while maintaining privacy around decisions that aren't final. When questioned about your relationship status, rather than providing your complete dating history, you could respond, "I'm selective about who I invest time with." This communicates standards without revealing vulnerability or availability. The power of strategic ambiguity lies in its ability to keep you in control of your own narrative. People can't use information against you that you haven't provided. They can't manipulate your choices if they don't understand your complete decision-making framework. This brings us to emotional ambiguity, which connects back to the first law but operates at a deeper level. While controlled scarcity manages when you display emotions, strategic ambiguity manages how those emotions are interpreted. Most people broadcast their emotional state clearly: happy, sad, angry, excited, frustrated. Their faces, voices, and body language provide immediate access to their internal experience. This makes them easy to read, predict, and influence. But emotional ambiguity maintains interpretive space around your feelings. A slight smile that could mean amusement or assessment, silence that could indicate thoughtfulness or judgment, calmness that might suggest confidence or calculation. This forces people to pay closer attention to you. They start studying your expressions for clues. They become more invested in understanding your reactions because those reactions aren't immediately accessible. And here's what happens next. When people work harder to understand you, they become more emotionally invested in you. The effort they put into interpretation creates psychological ownership. They begin to feel like they have a special relationship with you because they're putting energy into decoding you. This is how strategic ambiguity transforms casual interactions into meaningful connections. Not through oversharing or emotional availability, but through creating interpretive space that others feel compelled to fill with their attention and investment. The mastery of this second law requires understanding that power flows not from what people know about you, but from what they believe they might discover. Not from the information you provide, but from the possibilities you suggest. Not from the clarity you offer, but from the depth you hint at. When you combine controlled scarcity with strategic ambiguity, something remarkable happens. You become someone who appears selectively and speaks meaningfully, but whose complete thoughts and motivations remain partially veiled. This combination creates what Machiavelli would have recognized as the perfect social position. You're present enough to be felt, mysterious enough to be remembered, and ambiguous enough to be projected upon. People begin to assign you qualities and capabilities based on their own hopes and fears, rather than your explicit claims. This transformation leads us to the final and most crucial law, the law of emotional immunity. This is where ordinary social players separate from true masters of influence, because while the first two laws reshape how others perceive you, this third law determines whether you can maintain that position under pressure. Here's what most people don't realize about social dynamics. They're constantly being tested. Every interaction is a probe to discover your emotional breaking point. Can you be rattled? Can you be manipulated through guilt, anger, or excitement? Can your composure be shattered with the right trigger? Machiavelli observed that princes fell not because they lacked intelligence or resources, but because their emotions could be weaponized against them. Their anger made them predictable. Their fear made them controllable. Their need for approval made them vulnerable. The law of emotional immunity isn't about becoming cold or unfeeling. It's about developing what I call selective emotional responsiveness. You choose when, where, and how intensely you react to external stimuli. Your emotions become tools you wield rather than forces that wield you. Most people react immediately to social provocations. Someone insults them, they defend. Someone praises them, they soften. Someone challenges them, they escalate. This reactivity hands control of their emotional state to whoever decides to push their buttons. But emotional immunity operates differently. When faced with provocation, you pause. When offered flattery, you remain centered. When presented with challenges, you respond from choice rather than reflex. This creates an unsettling effect on others. They expect emotional reactions and receive calculated responses instead. They throw emotional bait and watch it sink without effect. They attempt to create drama and encounter only stillness. The power shift is immediate and profound. When people realize they cannot emotionally manipulate you, they begin treating you as an equal or superior by default. They stop testing your boundaries because those boundaries appear unshakable. Here's how this works in practice. Someone makes a cutting remark designed to provoke you. Instead of defending or counterattacking, you simply observe them with mild curiosity. Your silence forces them to sit with their own aggression while revealing their attempt at manipulation to everyone present. Or someone lavishes you with excessive praise, hoping to make you emotionally dependent on their approval. Rather than accepting the flattery eagerly, you acknowledge it briefly and redirect the conversation. You've communicated that while you appreciate recognition, you don't require it for your sense of self-worth. This emotional immunity extends to larger social pressures as well. Group dynamics often involve collective emotional states. Everyone gets excited about something. Everyone gets angry about something. Everyone agrees to dislike someone or something together. The person who maintains emotional immunity doesn't automatically join the collective emotional experience. They observe it. They might participate if they choose to, but their participation comes from decision rather than social contagion. This independence creates respect because it demonstrates strength. People recognize, consciously or unconsciously, that you can't be moved by the same forces that move them. You operate from a different level of psychological development. When you combine all three laws, something remarkable occurs. You become someone who appears selectively, speaks with depth, but maintains mystery, and remains unshakable regardless of social pressure or emotional manipulation. This isn't about becoming antisocial or manipulative yourself. It's about developing the psychological strength to engage with others from a position of choice rather than need. You interact because you want to, not because you have to prove something or gain something or defend something. People sense this difference immediately. They begin approaching you with more respect, more consideration, more genuine interest, because you've demonstrated through your behavior that you value yourself enough to be selective about how you spend your time, energy, and emotional resources. The beautiful paradox is this: by becoming less available, less predictable, and less reactive, you become more attractive, more influential, and more respected. By requiring less from others, you receive more. By needing less validation, you command more attention. This is Machiavelli's ultimate insight about human nature, translated into modern social dynamics. Power flows not to those who demand it loudest, but to those who demonstrate they can exist perfectly well without it. Master these 3 silent laws, and you'll discover what it means to move through social spaces, not as someone seeking position, but as someone who naturally occupies it, not as someone trying to prove their worth, but as someone whose worth speaks for itself through presence alone. The transformation begins the moment you decide to implement them. And once you experience the shift in how others respond to you, you'll understand why these principles have governed human social dynamics for centuries, and why they'll continue to do so long after we're gone. Because some truths about power and influence are truly timeless, and now they're yours to use.